The court case, sadly, although I was getting a lot closer to normality than I'd been in my darkest days, my marriage was at an end. Julie left me. The stress of the breakup and the subsequent divorce didn't help my mental state, but with help from Dr. Page and Frank Queggan, I just about held it together. In 1998, I started going out with a local girl called Rebecca, and after a couple of years we were married. It wasn't long before Bex became pregnant with our daughter Annabelle. Happy days at the time. My night terrors were still coming, though they were less frequent and frightening as the years wore on, and I knew I would never escape them. I was still haunted by memories of the Sir Galahad, but had gradually come around to the idea that it wasn't my entire fault. The equipment had malfunctioned and the guards shouldn't even have been aboard the ship when the attack happened anyway. Others could share at least some of the blame, but I had no realistic hope of finding work. I was still not 40, but I was washed up and finished. It was a depressing thought. Then, one day, I got chatting with another ex-soldier who had also been diagnosed with PTSD. He told me that a class action was being developed in order that victims could sue the Ministry of Defense for damages. The basis of the action was that the MOD had known all along that soldiers were likely to suffer psychological injury from the conflict, that they'd known how to help them with this, and that they had failed to do so. I didn't know what a class action was. It turned out to be a group of people all suing together to avoid the cost and repetition of hundreds of individual cases. But I was very interested, not so much by the idea of financial compensation, though obviously that would have been handy, but mainly because I wanted someone, somewhere, to recognize what had happened to me and others like me. I decided to seek legal advice, and, after bouncing around a number of different solicitors, I found myself represented by the firm taking the lead in the PTSD case, Manchester-based Linda Myers. I underwent what felt like dozens of interviews and evaluations, including a very thorough psychiatric investigation carried out by Dr. Jonathan Bisson, an expert in PTSD, a leading lecturer in psychiatry, and a former Army psychiatrist. I remember him telling me that I had had a window of opportunity for treatment of my PTSD after the Falklands War. If you catch it early enough, it can be dealt with to the point where it can often be practically cured. Unfortunately, due to the long period that had elapsed between the end of the war and my eventual diagnosis, that window of opportunity was now closed. I am afraid you will have varying degrees of PTSD for the rest of your life, he said. Not great news, but it was good that he at least recognized my problem. Before the Falklands, I had been fine. The condition had developed as a direct result, said his report. Another psychiatric evaluation was done in Manchester by an American professor, Charles Figley. I had confidence that Charles really understood PTSD and combat stress generally because, uniquely for an expert in this field as far as I know, his experience was not limited to what you could read in textbooks. He had spent 4 years in the United States Marine Corps between 1963 and 1967, and among that period was a whole year spent fighting in the Vietnam War. He put me at ease immediately, and we spent several hours together, which ended when he shared some relaxation techniques that helped calm me down. He too said categorically that my problems were I had another psychiatric evaluation carried out in Edinburgh, and that, again, confirmed the same thing. I had a bad case of PTSD brought on by the events I had witnessed in the Falklands. Not surprisingly, this was disputed by the government. I underwent a further evaluation, conducted in Liverpool by Dr. Stephen O'Brien on behalf of the MOD. He argued that I didn't have PTSD after all. The gist of his argument centered on the ad that I had posted in Soldier of Fortune magazine advertising my services as a mercenary, and the fact that I had later re-enlisted in the army and then volunteered for service in Northern Ireland. This showed I didn't avoid stressful situations and danger, he said. In fact, I actually sought them out. This meant, he felt, that the PTSD diagnosis was incorrect. This ignored the fact that many other sufferers had done precisely that kind of thing, and also that I wasn't aware, at the time that I re-enlisted, of precisely what my problem was. Linda Myers also took witness statements from people who could confirm the changes in me after the Falklands. From the Army side, they interviewed 3 other lads who had all served with me down there. My dad and even one of our neighbors back home also gave statements. I was and still am very grateful for the support of all of these people. Their statements make sober reading for me. Scouts said I was like a zombie, numb and withdrawn when he saw me in Stanley after the ceasefire. He told how he'd pulled me back from the railings on the ship on the way home, and how I'd been crying uncontrollably about the 2 Argentinian pilots I felt sure I had killed. He went into detail about rooming with me for 2 years during my second spell in the army, saying he had heard secondhand tales of my night terrors after the end of the war, but that during the years we shared a room, he'd seen them for himself. I experienced it firsthand, on the majority of nights, occasions when he would often wake up screaming and retching as though he was choking on an object. He would also sit up whilst still asleep and say there was someone in the room. He would often imagine there was an Indian warrior or Roman soldier. He went on. Before going to the Falklands, Tony was regarded as being a popular, easygoing and enthusiastic member of our unit. He had a reputation for being an exceptionally skilled rapier missile operator. He was also very conscientious about his dress, and he had a high level of fitness. After returning, we were well aware of his unstable nature. Within the regiment, there is a hierarchy based on the toughest men because of Tony's violent reputation. Even these men tended to steer clear of him. Tony had become noticeably more violent and destructive, and was generally regarded as being a lunatic by the other lads. It wasn't a flattering read, but it did at least paint a picture of the changes in me since the Falklands. Bob, my sergeant in charge of 3-2 Alpha, described me as a very keen and professional young soldier who might have been promoted. If I had stayed in the army, he said I'd become much quieter and withdrawn after the Sir Galahad sinking. Pete Ball, our unit's medic, said that despite all of this, and even though I was physically assessed after the conflict ended, no time was given to my psychological and emotional state of mind. Even if it had been, however, and PTSD had been diagnosed, he said it would have made no difference. Had I reported this to his superior officers, none of them would have cared. Our superiors classed people reporting psychological problems as working their ticket and putting their symptoms on. He talked about noticing the change in me after I had less contact with Anthony because I had moved further up the ranks. But he was different from the Anthony the First had known before the Falklands. He had no sparkle in his mannerisms. He appeared to be distant and withdrawn a lot of the time. I believe Anthony would have had the potential to go high up in the army had he not been affected by his experiences in the Falklands. He was a good soldier before the Falklands. My dad's statement, confirmed by a neighbor, went into some detail about my violent outbursts at home. Before joining the army, there was nothing aggressive or abnormal about him. On his return from the Falklands War, he had undergone a total character change. From being a typical happy-go-lucky lad, he had turned into a drunken loudmouth. Whilst on leave, he took to sleeping in a trench in the garden in his uniform and on occasions chased people in the street. In my opinion, the person who went to the Falklands and the person who returned are two different people. I feel I lost my boy in the war, only he didn't die. I fear it is only a matter of time before he takes his own life and finally gets some peace. My second wife, Rebecca, also gave a statement in which she confirmed my regular night terrors and panic attacks. With all of that behind me, and despite the report by the mod's Dr. O'Brien, I felt reasonably confident that we had a chance of winning. No one could realistically claim I was making up my symptoms. They clearly only started after the Falklands and far from the army doing anything to help. The prevailing attitude was at best to ignore mental health issues. With time on my hands as we waited for the case to come to court, I started looking deeper into PTSD. To be continued. If you are enjoying this, please like and subscribe. And check out A.A. McNally's book Still Watching Men Burn, Fighting the PTSD War.